Okay, welcome back to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. My name is Pete Deely, and I'm here with my professor, Professor Lucas Hubo. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Peter. How are you doing today?
I'm good, although I was chastised by my wife for referring to your looks as anything other than devastatingly handsome. So I'm here to publicly apologize for such rudeness. I think I
Not at
can
all.
only attribute it to a lack of submission coffee that I might not have
It
had.
might be. It might be. You know what? Like next week, we're getting 1 week away. Both of us competing next week.
That's
I'm
right.
going
Yeah.
to Nogi Worlds in Vegas, so I'm double my dose on submission coffee for the next few days. And you're getting for the Master Cup next week, so
That's
let's go,
right.
man.
Yeah, me and the old dogs will be at it on the 9th as well, and we'll be cheering for you from Las Vegas. And fortunately, from what I understand, Jiu-Jitsu World League, IBJJF have not declared submission coffee a performance enhancing substance. So
Let's see after my title. Let's see if they will
that's
try
right.
to.
That's right. That's right. Well, the last go round, I was on the gold medal stand. I just not to brag, but I loaded up on submission coffee and they didn't know what was coming. So
I will add that was 2 in a row, the last two tournaments to do
well,
that.
that's
So,
right. Yeah.
so
Well,
I think they should start looking finishing off as a
we might be
great
conceding our
performance.
our big advantage. Well, listen, all of this stuff, Scott. Let's put this away and get to the our amazing guest today. So our good luck has extended another week. We have an amazing person to talk to, and if we were going to go and talk about all the things he's done, we'd be here for too long and wouldn't have time for the conversation. So, Professor Eli Knight, thank you for spending time with us. We're really grateful
You're
that you.
welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I love the podcast and appreciate you having me on to have this conversation. Thank you.
Well, we have prepared for you, and we were joking prior to the podcast, even Professor Lucas, before you got here, that for Professor Eli's had people like, well, I used to watch your videos at the beginning of my jiu-jitsu career, and now, so I'm pretty sure I'm much older than him, but he was like, "Are you calling me old?" And so what we wanted to kind of start with was how you've seen jujitsu change over your time in your involvement in jujitsu. And Professor Robert Drysdale talked a little bit about the tension between the growth of jujitsu in the world and sort of the more traditional aspects of jujitsu. And he has this moment in one of his podcasts where he compares Joe Rogan to Elvis and how Elvis popularized karate, and many people might have gotten their first exposure to jujitsu listening to the Joe Rogan podcast. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on as jujitsu has grown, has it changed in your time? And if so, kind of what you think about that.
Yeah, I listened to that interview with Robert Drysdale, who is an absolute legend, absolute brilliant man. And I think that analogy had so many layers to it. If you really think about Elvis and what he did and the genres that he borrowed from and how he popularized and made things mainstream that probably wouldn't have otherwise ever become mainstream. I mean, or would have had to take a very different route. Yeah, I think that's a really insightful kind of analogy. As far as how I've seen things change, there's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
lot there. I'll try not to go into every single aspect, but I think that it's been interesting when I first started, and I was coming from more of a traditional background of martial arts. I started originally taekwondo, and I was doing Japanese jiu-jitsu whenever the Gracie kind of explosion. I remember watching some bootleg Gracie's in action videotapes even prior to the UFC, and
Mhm.
then when the UFC came out, we were doing Japanese jiu-jitsu and we saw this jiu-jitsu and we're like, oh, that's not like jiu-jitsu. We it looked more like judo, honestly. And so seeing that, we're like, we need to be doing this. And I honestly think there were three main reactions. This is what I think about. There were three main reactions whenever everyone saw the first UFC that were already doing martial arts. They said either, okay, we need to be doing this too. Like this
Right.
is extremely effective. We need to supplement this at least with what we're doing, or that's we need to quit what we're doing and do this instead. Or they just buried their head in the sand and doubled down. And it's like, well, our martial art is too deadly to compete in that environment. So that's why we don't need to pay attention to that. It's a fad. It'll go to the wayside and we'll just still stay with our pressure points and our chi knockouts. So those were the three main reactions. And it's interesting to see how things have almost come full circle back to that now, because it's like, if you're to deny the efficacy of jujitsu in its popularity today, just mostly because it's popular, or you don't want to do the work of going to learn it because it's hard when you're doing something that's a little easier, then you have to have some kind of built-in excuse for that. But the landscape is interesting because I remember when we first started, and it was a group of us in a small town in the middle of nowhere, essentially, for all intents and purposes. And so we had to travel to go to seminars or camps if we were lucky and we could afford it at the time. And so we went to everywhere that we could when we would just kind of stalk hoists around the nation and Horion, because back then it was Horion Hoist and Kaiki were the main instructors with Gracie Academy. And so we were lucky that sometimes we would go to a seminar and it would be, and Grandmaster Helio would be there when
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah, it was incredible. That I got my, I tell people essentially, I mean, because it's literally true that I got my blue belt from Grandmaster Helio because he gave our group blue belts whenever we were at a camp one time. And so that was, and then everything else came from directly under Hoist up until the 3rd degree black belt, which I got last September. Yeah. And then, so it was, back then when we first started in the 90s, there was not really any distinction. Hoist would come in, and honestly, to his credit, Hoist doesn't really distinguish these days either. He doesn't say this is more this context or that context. It's like he comes in, he's like, this is what you do. This is what's happening. This is what you do. And there's a beauty and simplicity in that. There's absolutely a virtue in that kind of non-distinctive thing. I don't teach like that. I'm like, this is something that you're going to do no gi versus gi. This is something that would be, you're going to get scored on for this. This is something that's going to be more effective in MMA, or this is something that could have application in self-defense, because those are the 4 main modalities of jiu-jitsu. In my opinion, it's gi, no gi, MMA, or self-defense. Like, those are basically all the context. And so I like to notice over time, like which techniques have the most application across those different modalities as possible with the least amount of modification. Because those to me are some of the most valuable techniques, and they're some of the most beautiful techniques too, because it shows you how perfectly evolved they are from multiple contexts. So, I mean, that's something that's really interesting. And it's something that I think needs, it requires more distinction these days than back whenever. You could go, I mean, you saw what Hoist did, and he was just a god, and he was on a pedestal. And so whatever he said to do, it was just like, yeah, I'm not going to question that at all. You know, and that there's good and bad, I think, and the fear or apprehension to question your instructor. I think that because my last name is not Gracie, and I didn't have any of those accolades, I feel compelled a lot of the time when I teach things to make those concessions and to invite questions and everything, so that I can, you know, if I can't answer those questions very well, that shows me that I need to put more thought into it. So that's how I've kind of catered my learning over the years, and seeing how the atmosphere of everything has changed over the time has kind of contributed to that.
One thing that was interesting to me, talking to Professor Drysdale, is that he's like, look, I've talked to everybody of note in the jujitsu, world. He said, but when I talk to Hoist, I'm like starstruck. The person that he's like holds up with the highest regard. One thing that's fascinating to me as a beginner is that I have a chance to talk to people like you who have connection to what I consider for the strain of jujitsu that I'm connected to, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, that studying with Elio, that I still have a chance to talk with people that have experiences with, clearly there are other people besides him that are important to the roots of this. But for those of us who are taken with Hickson and the Gracie strain of this thing, it's still extraordinary to me. And I love the distinctions between gi, no gi, MMA, and self-defense, because I think there's a lot in that. There's a lot to that part of the conversation. If I could ask, like, the experience of being in a training session with people who were in many ways the beginnings of jiu-jitsu in the United States, like Elio and then today, what might someone have experienced back then that they wouldn't experience in a typical environment currently?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where maybe where my head was going when I started talking about those different modalities, because there wasn't really any distinction.
Yeah.
It was like you go into a training session and we're working on like cross collar chokes from closed guard. And it's like, okay, well, will that materialize in a street fight? I mean, maybe if the guy's got a jacket on, but it wasn't, there wasn't like, I, so for me again, because I was nobody. And when I started teaching, and I'm for all intents and purposes, I'm still nobody that should be just like have my word taken as without question. So I feel compelled to say, think about this. If you were going to do something like this in a street fight, right, then these are the considerations you have to take into effect. It's like, are you on concrete? So maybe this
Right.
is something are you in a confined space? Can the guy punch you? Can he bite you? Can he do this and that? So, these are questions that kind of go over in my head when I'm teaching, and there just really wasn't that distinction. And again, like I said, I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying that as almost a virtue, because they were just giving the essence of jiu-jitsu. And this is also kind of parlays into one of my opinions about a lot of the self-defense from Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is, and I try to be very careful because I don't ever want to come across as disrespectful in any way.
Sure.
So now I'm going to say, but, so it negates everything I just said before. But the idea though, is that I think that what a lot of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu self-defense is actually doing, it's instilling in you, it's kind of uploading in you traditional values of judo and jiu-jitsu. And so a lot of the stepping, a lot of the angles, a lot of the leverage, a lot of these concepts. So is it the best possible response in a lot of these situations where you see, okay, this is the attack, this is the response? Could there be better responses or could there be different responses? Yeah, absolutely, as long as they operate under similar principles. But that's the thing, it's using the technique as a delivery system for the principle. And that's one of the most beautiful things I think that happens with jiu-jitsu. Is like a good technique should be a delivery system for a deeper underlying principle that can apply to multiple situations, positions, contexts, everything else. And you're again, this is a martial art. And I think people forget about that these days more than back in the old days, back in the old days. So because what people want to know now is, I swear I could put up a video doing the most basic arm lock from the guard, right? That anybody on day 3 of jiu-jitsu classes is going to learn. And if it gets enough traction, you're going to have people saying, yeah, but what if the guy does this? Oh yeah, try to do that on Khabib, try to do that on it's like, you're going to get all these redactions and all these contradictions and everything. And it's just, and that didn't happen. Well, first of all, with the proliferation of social media, that's bound to happen with anything.
Yes.
But now it's because everybody has an equal voice, for better or worse, on this platform, and they can just say whatever. And so, and that's fine, because they're typically they reveal their own ignorance to the topic at hand whenever they open their mouths. But it wasn't something that you had to have so much demonstrable proof on your resume that this thing works. It's like, this is coming from a source who I respect, who has the lineage and a background and a family history, and they've done this. I don't think he would be showing me this thing if it wasn't valid. So now I can go and I can research it, and I should have an open dialogue again to ask questions to my instructor.
Right.
But just the audacity that people have these days to be able to
we see that
go
like
on.
everywhere, right? Like
It's
whenever there's a
crazy.
crisis, we had a couple of years of everybody being a viral immunologist, regardless of their
Yes, yeah.
education. Social media was their platform to explain the public health fallacies in the world. And then whenever there's a financial crisis, we find a whole crop of economists that,
Oh yeah, I'll
right.
go find you Bitcoin experts right now.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You'll be in 6 group chats by lunch. Trust me.
Exactly.
Professor Eli, talking a little bit about, well, 2 things. First, that explosion of jiu-jitsu over the years, how big it is right now, and assimilate that with also the social media exposure, right? Like you're saying, everything that we do now, everyone has that equal voice. They can say something, they can do something, and you can see a lot of, I would say, more those young athletes, that new generation of athletes using the social media, whereas for their own purpose on exposing themselves and be a big name of the sport, which is 100%, that's what they're supposed to do. But at the same time, I believe, like, depending how they expose themselves, they will attract different group of people, right? And we can see some of maybe the most accomplished athletes right now, that's my personal opinion, right? Like sometimes like they were able to expose themselves so much, but I believe attracting not exactly the group of people that jiu-jitsu usually will be attracting, right? And then you have that great variety, but also kind of like maybe losing a little bit of the core values of something, right? And how do you see that? I don't know if you agree with that or not, but like, how do you see this coming for the future?
Just say Gordon Ryan. Go ahead. Like this, go ahead and say the most polarizing figure in all of jiu-jitsu.
Which I keep going back and forth about Gordon Ryan, right? At first, I didn't like him, and after he stopped talking, I was like, man, he is amazing. Like you can you can say anything bad about his jujitsu, right? It's
Oh
just
no, yeah.
unbelievable. And then sometimes you say something again, and they're like, oh my god.
He's he's the Donald Trump of jiu-jitsu. It's like, he actually has a pretty good point on this policy over here. It's like, wait, he said what? He called who? Yeah, it's funny. But no, I think that the problem, and so this is, I think, the biggest dysfunction of social media is that no matter what the topic is, and jiu-jitsu is not above it, is that we have a hard time separating the the person from their positive and their negative. Like everybody's human, right? I mean, so I can still, I use the analogy of like, okay, Mike Tyson, problematic figure, had some serious issues and demons over the years, has done some arguably pretty horrible things, but does that in any way affect his boxing acumen? Like, no, it doesn't. Gordon Ryan, he can feel whatever he wants to feel about this socioeconomic thing or this political thing or this whatever. But it's like if the problem that people have, I think, a lot of the time is they want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? They're like, oh, screw this person over here because he said this or that. It's like, what does that have to do with how he passes the guard? Like, what does any of that matter? But to your point, though, you're exactly right, because it does attract for the people who do like his controversial hot takes or this person or that person or whoever it is. I think Craig Jones is kind of another one in a different way, because you can't take anything hardly serious coming out of his mouth at all. He's absolutely hilarious, in my opinion. I absolutely love listening to his stuff. But again, I try to keep compartmentalized his jujitsu and his fighting, his whatever, from his whatever other takes. And if I think he's funny over here, that's fine. If I think he's stupid over here, that's fine. If I think he is not a good person. So this is something that always comes back to me. I have somebody, I won't name them, but he started out training with us. He's very awkward, socially awkward, very unusual kid from an unusual background. And he came in and we tried to accept him with open arms, and we trained with him for a long time, and he got very good, and he was just soaking it all up, soaking up all the jiu-jitsu that he could. And he had a really big desire for competition. And we weren't heavy into competition back then, but he had such a desire, we want to foster that. And so he got into competition. He just rose to the occasion. That was his niche, everything. But it's like he also started to get very cocky. And we always try to foster an environment of like trying to manage ego, because you can't take it away. Everybody has ego, and it's silly to say check your ego at the door and all those old tropes. It's like, yeah, I mean, we have that though. So let's instead of trying to ignore it and suppress it, let's think about, okay, what is it telling us about ourselves? And so we always try to have that kind of environment. But with this kid, it was like hard. And then the better he got, that was the problem. So it was such an interesting case. And he went on and on. Like to this day, he left, he was with us like 6 or 7 years, and he went on to do great competition things, but just revealed a lot of really negative aspects of his personality. So what I'm getting to is that I don't believe that jujitsu makes you, like studying and training jujitsu inherently makes you a better person. And I think that a lot of the time we want to think that, and I wanted to think that for a long time. I wanted to think that for a long time, that everybody needs to do jujitsu and it's going to make the world a better place, this and that. I think it has the capacity to. But I think more than anything, that's the product of your environment, your coaches, a lot of that, it contributes, but you also, there's a lot of other factors that personally that you have to deal with, so I think that.
Yeah, I mean, and Pedro Sauer, Master Pedro Sauer talked about this notion, right, of like many jujitsu high level practitioners have had many negative qualities squashed out of them, and because humility is often required
Mm.
in that. But when you guys
Mhm.
talk about, like, in your early days, that if you wanted to get some exposure to jiu-jitsu, you were getting bootleg VHS tapes, and
Yes,
right,
yes.
it's like an underground world. And by
Mhm.
definition, like as professor says, like, now we are attracting many more people. And by
Mhm.
virtue of the fact that there are more people, the amplitude between,
Yeah.
like, who's in the mix, there's more people, which means that you're going to have more extraordinary people and more people that perhaps, don't adopt the lessons of the art. And
Yeah.
in that, like,
And to, sorry, Peter,
not at
and
all.
to
Yeah.
Professor Eli's point, I love it when you said about managing ego, right? Like I have a friend who's also a professor. He's a fourth degree black belt now. And he say like, he was the first one that I heard saying everyone like, oh, leave your ego outside the door, right? Have some schools that have this on their facility, like leave your ego outside. It's like, no, bring your ego in and let's learn how to manage that, you know?
Right.
And have
Yes.
you saying something really similar, it's like, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And
Thank you. Yeah. I think that that's really the thing that people, it's easier to see things in very simplistic black and white terms like that. It's like
yeah,
you check your ego at the door, or this, like there's all kinds of tropes like that in the jiu-jitsu world, and all over the place too. But to be realistic about it, I think it's something that does require it, because that's how real growth is going to happen. If you just ignore it and say, okay, I'm gonna just suppress this part of myself,
So
then
why
you
will
never.
come back?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing with suppression. It's going to bubble up, and then
yeah,
like it's
right.
going to come out in the worst ways possible.
Yeah.
So it's better to identify it and try to figure out where that actually comes from and what you can do with it, and how you can maybe channel it into something more positive, because you recognize that it's not the best thing about you.
When the I think the vitality of the art and of the sport is enhanced by having more people in it, even if that means that we will have some folks that don't kind of listen to the core messages, or somehow are able to ignore what I think are, core requirements to developing. On the other side of the on the other side of the equation, as somebody who's had such a long arc of experience, is it producing more innovation, or is it stifling innovation? Because when I look at people, your videos have been seen millions of times, and we were talking a little bit about that, which is, when you think about the people who were producing bootleg tapes in the 90s, like, their audience was minuscule compared to the audience that has seen you. Out of that extraordinary exposure, is it producing innovation that wouldn't otherwise be produced? Or is it somehow or other limiting innovation because people are getting more shallow exposure as opposed to more or deeper exposure?
Both. It's
Okay,
that.
that's
I
fair.
think
Yeah.
it's both, and I think that more than anything, it's probably a ratio that slides,
Mhm.
from one extreme to the other. I think that it definitely does, for better or worse. I think that it does promote innovation. The problem sometimes is you see innovation for innovation's sake. Like, so some of the worst. I don't want to. I want to be as respectful as I can, but I think some of the, we'll say worst for lack of a better term, videos that are floating around out there. And I don't want to like try to insinuate at all that my videos are of any certain quality. Like, I think that there's videos out there I've done that I wish that I hadn't, and I'm tempted to even like take down or anything like that. That just because of where I was whenever I made them, and
Mhm.
but it's kind of like at the same time, I want people to understand too that like everybody is going through a growth process.
Yeah.
I bet that if you watch 15-year-old, or you watch John Danaher when he was in his 20s versus now,
Yeah.
you're going
Right.
to see two different opinions. But I think though that as far as the innovation goes, you see some videos out there, and it's like, I can tell, maybe other people can or can't, but I can tell you're just doing this weird thing this way just because it's something different. just
Yeah.
because you can. It's like the Jurassic Park thing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So so you'll see people that are just putting things together sometimes that are like, man, I don't know. Um, Now the biggest problem with that, it's like, okay, do whatever you want to do. It's an art, so your expression can be whatever. And people should have enough decency and or intelligence to, if they see something it's like, that's kind of wacky, just keep scrolling, man. Just go on. You don't have to go on there. I put up a video the other day that there's a weaving pass I like to do and I got this from an old Audrey Gaval drill a long time ago. But it's whenever you're going shallow on a dars, they're really keeping their head back. And so you do this kind of weaving pass to side control on the other side. Thank you. And so it's a little chain, because like when you make that pass, if they turn towards you and you block their attempt at an underhook, you can pin it and then you can step over for a mounted triangle. Potentially, I mean, is that sequence going to materialize precisely like that in a live roll? It may or it may not. I mean, I can do that to white belts all day. I mean, but it's a sliding scale. So it's like it can work, and it's more than anything. I like things like that. And I like to do videos like that and see videos like that, because if it causes a spark in your brain, like, oh, I never thought about putting these two things together.
Right.
That is a catalyst for innovation right there. And that's only going to help, I think, and for the most part. And it's like, what are the stakes? I mean, you're going to go out and try it. It's never going to materialize for you. Okay, well, then just move on, do something else. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't put up a lot of self-defense videos anymore, because then that's a whole different conversation. But as far as that kind of stuff goes, you will see people that are like putting wacky stuff together. And it's like, okay, if I don't like it, I keep scrolling. The thing is, again, with the same thing with the comments, everybody having an equal voice on the platform, the people making the videos have a fairly equal voice. And you look at this guy's account, he's got 100,000 followers on Instagram. Then, it's like, oh, wow, he must be really good. Like, so the newer people are going to be like, oh, he must be really like know what he's talking about. He must be really this and really that. It's like, no, I mean, he had a couple viral videos that got shared around the right way, and he gained, 100,000 subscribers off of it, probably in like 2 videos out of his whole library, honestly.
Yeah, right.
And so but it's hard to discern that. Most people don't want to do the homework, So most of the people that you'll see that were, I feel like, watching these videos and thinking it's something that it's not, or commenting some kind of weird stuff on it or whatever, they're not the people who are training the best. I mean, it's really not. I appreciate people commenting positive things, but a lot of the people who comment silly things a lot of the time, or disrespectful things, they're not training enough, because if they did, they wouldn't be concerned with it. Like, if I show something they don't care about, they would just move on. That's what I do. I mean, if I see a video, I can't think of a video, no matter how crazy it and stupid I thought it was, that I felt really compelled to go on and be like, well, here's the problem with this right here.
Right,
it's like the audacity it blows me away. Absolutely blows me away. And I don't even remember what the question was at this point, because I went off on a tangent.
It's okay.
But I think it's maybe in there somewhere. But it's the social media aspect of it. Yeah,
It's funny how that goes. Like, I have some students that they start telling some names like, oh, do you know like this guy and that guy? And like, I saw this guy doing the technique, or like all the technique with the names, right? Like, I have been doing this for 20 plus years. I have no idea who the person is, right? And then I look at like, it's pretty much a jiu-jitsu social media influencer, right? Like, it's never accomplished anything on the competition, or like, yes, teaching, or like, anyway, it's his way to do things, right? And I believe every technique has a time and place, right, to do it. But I do have, when we started talking, I was kind of like laughing by myself here, because I have a student that he loves butt choke or side control boss, right? And every time he's there, every tournament he's there, it's like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, no, I want to get this butt choke. It's like, do you understand that every time they're passing your guy because you want to throw a butt choke, you probably should improve a little bit more your guys,
Yeah.
But it's just funny how it goes, right? It's a cool technique. I'm gonna do it no matter what.
There's a quote I really liked, and I don't to this day. I heard, I think, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West say it the first time, but I don't know if he was the first one to say it. But he said, you should never let your what did he say? Your safety net become a hammock. And I was like, man, that's beautiful because that's what people do. I notice and the analogy that works the best is like upa escape and elbow escape, right? So you teach a white belt upa escape and they can't escape anybody. They'll escape one out of every 20 times they try it. And they're just struggling with upa, upa, upa. And then you teach them elbow escape and it works really well. And so like, well, I don't need this upa escape anymore because every time I try upa, I wind up just getting it with my elbow escape. A simpler analogy is the a jab cross, right? So it's like, I don't knock anybody out with my jab, but I knock people out with my cross. So it's like, I don't need that jab anymore. I'm going to throw the jab out, just only throw my cross. Well, now what happens is you never knock anybody out with your cross again because that jab was setting up that other thing. So it's like, yeah, I landed a buggy choke. It's like, okay, cool. But if that's your primary plan, then part of your primary plan consists of you allowing your guard to get past. So if you miss that buggy choke, you're in trouble, man. You're in some trouble if you miss it. You better be really good at it.
When you see the evolution of because those distinctions you described, gi, no gi, self-defense and MMA, those are also 4 distinct business lines. And so as somebody who's cultivating business lines, those are probably to a certain extent, probably gi and no gi probably is a similar audience, but the MMA audience might not be the same as the gi audience in terms of students as customers, right? Do you see those divisions opening the jujitsu landscape in a way that there will be more things that come into the jujitsu landscape, or will it be that those 4 things will become their own things? And what I mean by that is when I'm 53. The gi is a good. At some point in time, I might elect to try to compete in the no gi. And when I say, listen, let me disclose. When I say compete, we're talking about the lowest level, the most fun. I don't want to in any way imply that I'm a competitor the way that you guys are competitors. So that being said, for somebody my age and my experience of having a game day, which is important to me. I love having the tension of having to think about being good enough to not embarrass myself in competition. But when I look at the younger guys they're more attracted to no gi, I think for a variety of reasons. So do you see the jiu-jitsu landscape as always being singular with these flavors in it, or do you see it becoming more, okay, we are the self-defense community that uses jiu-jitsu. We are the MMA community. We are the gi and the no gi. And maybe that's not important, but I'm just curious if you see those strains hardening in their boundaries or always being a part of the larger umbrella.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't really know for sure what I think about that. I do see that right now they're pretty disparate of things. There now with some overlap. I mean, you'll see places that do gi and no gi. I mean, it's rare to find a place that's like, oh, we don't do no gi here.
Right, right.
Everybody, even if it's a tiny aspect of their place, their gym or their academy, and then it's still present that they have a no gi contingency. Not everywhere does stuff focused on MMA, and a lot of times MMA gyms will often have strictly jujitsu classes rather than the other way around.
Yeah, yes, right, right. Yeah.
And that's because they got to pay the bills.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
It's partly because they love it, but MMA is the brokest demographic. I mean, honestly, if you're looking from a business sense, they're the poorest demographic. They're not the ones that are gonna. You look at MMA gyms, and unless they just have a stable of high level fighters that are getting sponsorships and endorsements and all this stuff, then they probably have a really successful kids jujitsu program, or they have a successful cardio kickboxing. They got something that's
So
profitable.
that's like the niche part of the 4. And it makes sense to me because it seems to me the offer the least longevity. I mean, I'm able to train in a way that I can still go to work. I have to sometimes leave my training early so I'm not so flushed for my
Not
next
sometimes,
meeting.
Peter. Not
Yeah,
sometimes.
I do. I have an aggressive, professional life in which I need to pay my bills. And so sometimes in those morning sessions, but I think underlying my question is the function of like ADCC as a attractor of athletes outside of other sports. And I'll give you sort of a parallel. I was a soccer athlete as a kid. and I played collegiate level soccer for a short period of time. In Division 3, I'm not trying to suggest I was some great soccer player, but I played at a level above high school. Now, the best athletes within my age group always gravitated to baseball, football, or basketball. Because if you had any notion that you could play at the Division 1 level, then there was an economic incentive because there were
Yes.
scholarships at that level. And because you have no idea of the competitive landscape nationally when you're a high school student, really, you might think you do, but you don't. You may have ideas that you could play in the professional leagues, which has extraordinary economic implications, even if it's like the tiniest, 16, 17-year-old just doesn't know how far away from the professional levels they are. So as a business, when I look at people that are non-jujitsu people might know the name Gordon Ryan, and I don't know that before this time period that that is equally as true. I think the Gracie family, through a variety of reasons, probably achieved some of that. But I'm wondering if now athletes that might otherwise pursue football, pick your sport of that's more popular in the United States, might say, you know what, I got exposed at 7 or 8 to jujitsu, and there's actually a road for me to become a professional jujitsu player. Am I overthinking that? Like, is there enough attention there that 5, 10 years from now, you know, and the other analogy for me is CrossFit. I was a part of like I got attracted to CrossFit like 2004 to
Mhm.
2006 ish, and it was Greg Glassman putting up, you know, workouts on a website that I felt like, and then within a period of time, ESPN and Reebok pick it up, and then it
Yeah.
explodes into something. And there are CrossFit athletes that end up making a lot of money. So I just wonder if it's a similar inflection point, or am I found it, so I feel like,
Mhm.
oh, everybody else will find it as well.
No, I definitely think that you're onto something as far as that goes. I mean, because now you do see grappling events on, like sponsored by UFC, like UFC Fight Pass picked up the EBI and they picked up like WNO and
Mhm.
wait, was that on UFC? Whatever it is. Flow Sports, I think, they did a
Yeah.
lot for that
Right.
community
Yeah.
when Flow Grappling, for, deserving of all the criticism that they are, like they have done a lot to put things into the mainstream so that people can now see and have access to it that wouldn't otherwise even come across that necessarily. And I enjoy seeing things like ADCC or EBI or Kasai or whatever these otherwise like what would have been alternative events to the IBJJF. I like to see those grow in popularity because for a couple different reasons. I apologize for my dogs. There's a leaf moving or something. But I think that seeing a variety of events, a variety of rule sets, a variety of different like looks to these things, they're also going to attract different competitors, and they're going to also make competitors reach beyond their comfort zone. Like last night, I think was the no gi debut of Tyson Doppler, right? And but you start to see it's like these guys that are just at the top of the world in winning worlds in the gi at IBJJF, and they're still less heard of than this guy who's for all intents and purposes not as technically gifted or technically talented as them, but they're making a bigger splash in this more mainstream
Mm.
televised or like
Yeah.
streamed events. He's going on and getting matches on Fight to Win and stuff like that, and just making a more of a name for himself. And part of that is that to the layperson, gi jiu-jitsu was way more boring than no gi jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
No gi jiu-jitsu does look more like fighting to somebody who knows less, maybe a little more fast paced probably the majority of cases, but
Right.
it's so there's all those aspects that so what you're saying is accurate. And then to go back to the social media aspect of it, as far as like people that would be in other sports and think, okay, I got exposed to this jiu-jitsu thing and I really like it. And then I started following these people and noticed they've got endorsement deals. They're sponsored. They're getting,
Right.
they're this and they're that, which a lot of that's BS, by the way, because like, these people are promoting things just because somebody sent them some free stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
like, yeah, I get it. I've done the same thing. It's like, this company reaches out. It's like, hey, we're sending you all this free stuff. And I'm like, I love free stuff. I'll give you a shout out. And then it makes you look like you have some kind of like legitimate sponsorship.
Right.
But I think that doesn't really, it doesn't exist as much for there's such a bigger pool of people in like high school and collegiate level mainstream sports that it's like you're not going to see a lot of freshman college like football players that are going to have all kinds of endorsement deals.
Right.
They're not going
Yeah.
to be on their social media showing like, hell, look at this company sent me this thing. It's like
Yeah,
it's too
although it'll
big.
be interesting with
Mhm.
the NCAA and sort of the rules about compensation
Mhm.
having been adjusted
Yeah,
recently, which will be
true.
and in my mind, like it's not rational that LeBron James would be on the jiu-jitsu mat versus, playing
Mm.
basketball. But,
Yeah.
that that that's an extreme example, but there's a whole other range of athletic people who might be chasing, trying to make their way from high school to Division 1 ball, or Division 1 ball to professional ball. That I'm curious 10 years from now what changes will occur in terms of the athletic look of folks. So
Mhm. Yeah,
I don't have a
I
yeah. What do you
yeah,
think,
I
Professor
think no,
Lucas?
I agree with you, Peter. I think especially when you after you use the CrossFit example, right?
Hmm.
Most at first, most of the CrossFit athletes they came from a background on lifting or
Yes.
whatever it is, right? And now you have this new generation of champions of CrossFit. They started training CrossFit,
Yes.
right? They
Right.
didn't have that other base, right? So they were like CrossFit athletes since day one. And now
Yes.
it's something like Matt Fraser. He was a weightlifting in college.
Hmm.
And then his career went out, and then he started like just training little by little and become one of the best. But because of his background, right? So I think somehow jiu-jitsu will get you something like similar to this. And talking about the event yesterday, for example, it's so awesome to watch that. It's such a high quality now, right? At first, jiu-jitsu you could only watch if you're at the tournaments, watching some
Yes.
fights, and then have 8
Right.
fights happening at the same time. Which one you gonna look? Sometimes you have like 3 or 4 really good, and then you couldn't the main movement sometimes you couldn't see it, right? Because you were looking to the other side
Yeah.
and those things. And then after that, with YouTube, you could watch some fights after, and then flow grappling, having like so every weekend, if you want to watch something, you can
Right.
watch it at good quality, right? So I think this will definitely help a lot over there.
Not to touch on a sensitive subject, but because Professor Lucas, doesn't, this pains, I think, the Brazilians to a certain extent, is that as things have migrated to the United States, there is a
I
different
agree.
a different economic relationship between
Oh
Totally.
yeah.
right,
Totally.
which has its upside and downside to it. But the upside is a broader group of people are involved now that weren't involved in the 90s. And my opinion is that we will see another, broader group. We had Braulio Estimo, forgive me if I'm saying that name incorrectly, but and he was on his way to Poland to teach. So he was there and he had come back. He lives in London and or somewhere in
For
England.
that, it was in Abu Dhabi.
He's in Abu
Yes.
Dhabi. This is an international instructor where he's only going there because it's rational for him to go there and teach people. So I, I th- I'm fascinated to watch it and to see my children are past the age where I would tell them what to do. That my kids are old at this point or older. But when I come into to our gym and where I'm seeing the kids program, I'm delighted at the equality between how the boys and girls are treated. There's not a lot of athletic circumstances where the girls are somehow or other not seen as doing something. Although this is changing, I mean, but they're treated equally. They're not looked at as like junior players. And it's conflict oriented, which I think is a value for girls to
Mhm.
be in those things. Because I don't have the knowledge that you guys have in terms of the competitive landscape globally, but I see, girls, young women fighting at levels where they're being picked up by media outlets. And some of them are so captivating that I
Mhm.
think they will bring other people into it. So it's an expansion geographically, and I think there might be an expansion from a gender perspective as well. So you'll get innovation and interesting things happening. I don't know, like in all
Yeah.
kinds of ways.
Oh, you see some like some females in the sport that are making they're kind of, it's almost like MMA 10, 15 years ago. You know, it's like, you remember the famous clip of Dana White saying he'll never have women fighting in the UFC, you know, like there'll never be a women's division. And now there's
Yeah,
women that are like the main card. They're their main fight on the card, you know, and it's, you know, it's showing that there is that space, you know, for females to be in the sport. And it's still male dominated for sure.
sure.
And
Yeah,
it's
right.
probably going to remain male dominated for a long time. But you see people like Theon Davies, you know, you see people like, I mean, I remember when Kira Gracie was like,
Yeah.
she was making a big name. She was making a huge name. You know, you see like, I'm, you know, I'm going to forget like 50 different people, but I mean, you see these big name females in the sport. And, you know, my girlfriend, she's starting to get more into the competition. You know, she's done a few, but she's going to take it a lot more seriously, and she's training more competitively now. And, you know, she was telling me the other day she's going to buy Theon Davies' new like BJJ Fanatics instructional, and I'm like,
Yeah,
well, I'm going to watch it, you know, because it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
I want to
Yeah, right.
watch her knee
Sure.
pass strategies, you know, her knee
Yeah.
cut pass strategies. Like she's like brilliant at it, and so like seeing like to your point, yeah, it's great, and it is a sport where it's interesting to see where the delineation between male and female athletes actually takes place, where it actually materializes. Because, you know, when you're, you know, when they're like 10 years old or younger, you know, then they're just going to be competing together, and there's not a big difference. Like before
Right.
puberty, like there's not really
Yeah,
any
right,
difference.
right.
If anything, the girls are probably going to be dominant in a lot of cases because they're going to have better flexibility. They're going to
Yeah,
typically
yeah.
have, you know, a lot of these attributes that the boys won't have until that puberty kicks in, testosterone kicks in. Now things
Mhm.
are a little different. That, you know, so that delineation makes sense, I think, from that perspective. But man, there's some scary females on there. It is
Yeah,
like I was
I
watching
think
It's so
Helena
exciting to
Cremor
watch
last
them.
night.
yeah.
Yeah, so
I
exciting to watch them so fast,
It
so
is.
aggressive. It's
Mhm.
nice.
and
Yeah.
I think because you know in that in a competitive environment where y- there's equality between the sport could be as equally captivating across the board. And so on the Joe Rogan had an interview with Hicks and Gracie, and he was talking about you know Ronda. Forgive me if I say this
Rousey.
Ronda Rousey. You know. As much as he talked about anybody else in terms of jujitsu excellence,
Mhm.
which really struck me because one, he was paying close enough attention to kind of recognize
Mhm.
that. And, you know, I liked the fact that that was a part of, you know, this extraordinary moment of, you know, when you do a Joe Rogan podcast, you're talking to millions and millions of people, not unlike when the
Well,
professor speaks here, like we generally
yeah, you kind of like sit back and you want to absorb that talk. I remember the first time that um I don't even know if I was a blue belt. I may have still been a white belt. And the first time I grappled with a high level female, and it was a seminar, and it was Marcelo Ferreira. And yes, it was. And he brought with him two of his students. Like they came from Brazil. They were all from Brazil. And Bianca, I remember her name was Bianca, and she was. I was still a skinny kid, like little skinny, kind of weak. You know, I was maybe like what was I, 17 maybe, but still, I was still bigger than her. I mean, she was maybe 115, 120. You know, but she was a brown belt, and a competitive brown belt even back then. And she like, I was just like, this is weird. Like this is so unusual, because even though I had grappled with smaller people or more advanced people or whatever, it was just it stuck out to me. And I don't know what, for all the reasons, but just how impressed I was by it. And I think that really something that it does, that is not even an explicit benefit, but it's definitely one of the most important benefits in my estimation of it, as far as a self-defense perspective. You know, whether you're studying this or that technique that is a quote unquote a self-defense technique, um, getting women into that environment where they're put into a grappling, close proximity, intimate like positions in the situation, and teaching them how to navigate that, and also how to remain calm, how to remain like operational, how to
yeah,
remain
right.
like in the moment,
Yeah.
and also how to be aggressive back. Like that's way more beneficial than you're gonna stick somebody in a weekend course on, you know, self defense for women, or rape prevention or whatever
Right.
it
Right.
is. You know, like
Mhm.
you're gonna if anything, a lot of those courses will feel either nothing will happen, or they'll fill women sometimes with a false sense of security that, oh, if this happens, I know this special deadly technique I can do. It's like, no, even if you do, even if you did learn something valuable, it's not going to materialize. It was, but people coming in and training every day. I mean, for that matter, whenever people, cause like I do have a little bit of a reputation in the jujitsu community as being one of the self-defense people, or people who still actually care about the self-defense part. But I mean, I think that because I have a realistic expectation of self-defense, it's like, I'm not going to go teach somebody how to gouge eyes and bite and scratch and pull hair and kick people in the balls and all this. It's like, yeah, I mean, that I guess, but jiu-jitsu is going to be way more valuable. Just going in and grinding it out and wrestling every day, like, and getting into a grappling environment where you're dealing with pressure and you're getting into uncomfortable situations. Like your shirt says, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. I remember we always used the term equanimity, and it was that calmness under stressful situations.
Right.
And that's what well, the Valencia brothers like to use the 753 code. And so one of the three is Fudoshin, I think is the equivalent of that. Right. So, when you put somebody in that environment, they're learning way more valuable self-defense because they're understanding how to maintain their composure enough in a stressful, physically exhausting environment to be able to operate and get themselves out of that. So that kind of high intensity problem solving is what's going to really keep you safer and more
Yes,
successful
right,
in
right.
a
Yeah.
fight than
Yeah.
anything is.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. Professor Lucas, we find ourselves at that juncture again where we could go on for a long, long time. Professor Eli, I'm going to ask you to do one last thing before we wrap it up, because we enjoy this question a great deal. And that is, could you tell us a story of how jujitsu affected somebody's life? And I'm sure you got lots of them, because many people have you've brought jujitsu to. But in conclusion of our conversation, could you tell us a story about somebody that jujitsu changed them in some meaningful way?
Yeah. I was just thinking how funny it would be if it was just a really horrible negative story
Yeah,
about how somebody's life was completely ruined by their jujitsu addiction. But not, I won't do that. Then.
okay, excellent.
Actually, I have a friend that I'm friends with to this day, and I think about this a lot. And he early on he started training with us, and he actually wasn't really turned on by the idea of jujitsu. He was doing some of the other things that our academy taught in the beginning. He was doing like we did Jeet Kune Do, Filipino martial arts. We had, like different kickboxing programs, and he kind of almost reluctantly got into the jujitsu. But then it like it tends to do, it kind of takes hold, and kind of infects you. And so he started to really enjoy it, and he was training more and everything. He was a military veteran. He's an Iraq war veteran, and he suffered with, like PTSD. He had, different things going on, and he got into a confrontation. I'll be kind of like careful with some of the details, but he got into a confrontation with somebody that resulted in a physical conflict. And he recounted back to me that, the way he was able to kind of physically subdue this person and hold and control them it was very powerful to him, that experience, because before he's kind of the mindset, like, if I get into a fight, I'm just going to go for broke, just like balls to the wall, anything goes. I'm going to just try to kill this person. I'm going to try to just destroy this person and hurt them and maim them. And to him, and by proxy to me, like the thing that was so powerful about it, he related. He's like, the fact that I could put a governor on that I could control that aspect of mine, and I could just physically restrain this person, and I had enough wherewithal not to cause them serious physical injury.
Yeah.
And that was all because of jiu-jitsu for me.
Yeah.
So, and the way he phrased it, he said, it gave me my humanity back. And I was like, that's the most beautiful way I think that it could have been phrased. I absolutely love that. It always, like, it gets me emotional. To this day thinking about it, because like it's one of the most powerful endorsements and testimonials I've heard about what jiu-jitsu can do, because people don't think about it in those terms. I think a lot of the time they think about what it's going to give me the ability to accomplish and do, and how I'm going to be a better fighter and all this,
Right.
but they don't think about that sense of control and restraint that it can also give you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and this is for me, what you're saying is a great deal of importance as it relates to, the notion of gentleness, right? So referred
Mm,
to as the gentle art. But sometimes people mistake, in my opinion, the notion of gentleness, that gentleness
Yes.
is a function of weakness and an inability to be
mm,
aggressive. Whereas
Mhm.
gentleness for me is a function of strength in that you are able to care for people in a way in which you're protective. And in that
mm,
gentleman's situation, that he protected his own future by not, losing
Mhm.
control in that. He
yes.
protected perhaps another person's life because
Mhm.
my guess he was trained in a way in which he could be lethal. And the world was better in that moment than it would have been without jujitsu. And in my mind, that is a function of gentleness. So that idea that the strongest people are, the people who can be the gentlest people. And Professor Lucas has used the term that, you have the ability, the strength to walk away from things, right?
Mm.
So I think like being capable and knowledgeable that you are not under the threat that, you couldn't do anything about, but instead
Mm,
you have the confidence to say, I don't have to give in to my ego's need to, display something here. I instead can take the road there. And so even if it gets physical, it's interesting to hear a story of in a physical confrontation, I
yeah.
can control things as opposed to let them get out of control. Is that fair, Professor Lucas? As
It
some,
is. It
yeah.
is. I agree 100%. And if I could just ask one more thing, Peter, before we
Yes, of
finish,
course.
I think so. Professor Lai, our goal here, besides have great conversation, listen to great stories and meet amazing people like you, is try to keep empowering jiu-jitsu in any way that we can do, right? So try to bring more people to start attending jiu-jitsu, have expose themselves to this amazing art. And also those that already started to keep pursuing that path. Right. We know it's challenging and everything, how we always talk about the blue belt curse and everything. But if you could, give a message, like a simple
Yeah.
one, something just to encourage people to start and to stay training,
Yes.
what could you tell them?
I think that, man, you got 3 hours I can no, I think the biggest thing for me that people, regardless of why you start, I think a good reason, there's 1,000 good reasons to start. It's great physical activity, it's problem solving, it's a controlled environment. It's going to make you feel more confident in your abilities, all these different reasons, self-defense, competition, whatever it is. But I think that one of the biggest things that oftentimes, if it doesn't get overlooked, it's not even, people aren't even aware of when it's happening, is that it's keeping you present. It's, not to get too, like, esoteric or anything, but it's keeping you in the present moment. And I think that these days we need that more than ever, man. Like,
Yeah.
we have 1,000 distractions. We can't put our phone down for more than 15 minutes. We've got emails and notifications and social media, and life is moving so extremely fast in every different direction that we have to learn, we have to study, we have to practice being physically and mentally present in the moment.
Yeah.
And you have to do that in jujitsu. If you don't do that, you're going to get choked. So you have to be focused on the task at hand, And so even if it's not jujitsu, whatever does that for you, I think jujitsu is great for it because you suffer the consequences immediately if you don't,
Mhm.
So I think that anything that does that for you, that gets you to focus on the singular thing at hand and turn the volume down on
Yeah.
all these other distractions in your life, it's going to be the best for your mental health. It's going to
Right.
get you the most psychological balance. It's going to teach you how to channel that same ability to be present whenever it's important and necessary, like with your kids or your spouse or in a business meeting, anything like that.
Sure.
If there's typically only negative consequences that come from distractions. So something that can teach you some device, some manner of thing that you can access to be able to pull yourself back to the present moment, I think is the most valuable thing that people need, that we aren't getting enough of these
Yeah.
days. And I don't think, in my estimation of it, for me personally, and for what I've seen from a lot of people,
Right.
jujitsu is absolutely perfect for that.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
so
to me, yeah,
that's so beautifully said.
That's awesome.
And I've referred to it as a moving meditation at times, and I think that,
mm,
that's extraordinary.
mm.
Thank you for using that language. Well, Professor Eli Knight, I mean, we are so happy you decided to spend time with us. So thanks for the hour with us.
I enjoyed it absolutely. I appreciate it, Peter and Professor Lucas. I appreciate it. It was great to meet you guys, even
Yeah,
virtually. So thank you so much for having me on. You guys have a fantastic podcast here. This is awesome.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.